请Stephen Patrick 先生上台。
Thank you. We really appreciate your time. First of all, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where we're meeting this morning, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Thank you for coming along. The Bridging Hope Charity Foundation was founded by Tina Tian and her family in 2015. And since then, Tina's dedicated much of her time to setting up the foundation with the focus on ensuring that the foundation has a significant and enduring impact in the fields of mental health and the arts. So mental health and the arts are the two pillars of the foundation. And it's the intention of the foundation to connect with friends, families, our colleagues, artists and mental health professionals to provide an opportunity for the community to live in a culturally vibrant and healthy society.
现在由我给大家简单的翻译一下。乔爱基金会呢是由甜甜女士于2015年成立的。她投入了大量的时间和精力建立和发展这个基金会。然后基金会的宗旨是主要关注在精神健康和艺术广大的领域。乔爱基金会的宗旨是将大家朋友、同僚、艺术家还有精神健康专家们聚集在一起，为我们的社会、为我们的社区提供一个文化活跃和健康的生活。
So in May of last year, the Bridging Hope Charity Foundation commenced a 3-year partnership with Lifeline with the aim of developing a crisis support service for the Chinese community within Australia. So the partnership was basically the outcome of a joint desire between Lifeline and the foundation to support the growth of an important crisis service and help to build a more resilient and suicide-free community. So our partnership over 3 years initially supported a specific Mandarin and Cantonese feasibility study to understand how Lifeline can better connect with the Chinese community in Australia. So we've been very proud to partner with the Lifeline research in establishing the feasibility of a Chinese language specific service. The project's explored the need for a service within the Chinese community as well as the cultural appropriateness for mental health delivery and wellbeing support service. So the long-term goal of the partnership is to provide Australian-based Chinese communities with more accessible crisis support and suicide prevention services. Our foundation will also support the research and the promotion of the Mandarin and Cantonese crisis support service through its connections with the Chinese community and also business leaders. So the person who's really been running this process and I invite to speak is Alan Woodward, the Executive Director of the Lifeline Research Foundation. Alan.
Thank you. I also would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on and our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. I would also like to acknowledge the experiences of those who have suffered loss to others by death by suicide and those who have experienced suicidality and suffering in their lives. I would also like to acknowledge, as we meet here today in these beautiful gardens, the historic and cultural connections between Chinese peoples and this country, Australia, and the Chinese-Australian community that has supported the exchange between the two countries for many years. I'd like to talk a little bit about the study that we have worked on together and to also give my acknowledgements of the research company Diverse Works and my friend and colleague Cecilia Anthony and her team who have contributed to some of the activities, and also of course to the work we've been able to do with the Bridging Hope Charity Foundation, who such as Melody and Anka who have contributed to our work as well. Alright, so the project partners, as you may have gathered, are listed here. Bridging Hope Charity Foundation with Lifeline and with Diverse Works. So to tell you a little bit about Lifeline, Lifeline is a well-known name in Australia and society, having operated a telephone crisis line since 1963 and a chat service, online crisis chat service since 2011, both of which are nationally available services. We also have a network of more than 40 Lifeline centres around the country providing community-based services. And our vision is an Australia free of suicide. We provide support for people during life struggles and difficulties. And we also seek to improve the resilience of people, families and communities in dealing with the things in life that cause us to struggle. I want to mention a couple of statistics before I go into the project details and findings. One statistic is that each year in Australia, the ABS data suggests that 2 million adult Australians will experience high psychological distress. High psychological distress is often related to negative life events or circumstances that occur or pressures that people feel in their day-to-day lives. And high levels of psychological distress may also be related to diagnosed or undiagnosed underlying mental health issues. ABS research also has suggested that 1 in 5 adult Australians will experience a mental health issue in the 12-month period. So this is a reality that in our broader society we have got underlying issues around mental health and well-being for a reasonable proportion of our adult population at any point in time. If we took a room of 100 people, we might figure that about 20 will be struggling to some extent with some mental health issues. Mental health is part of our human condition, in the same way that from time to time we suffer physical ill health and ailments. Mental health and well-being is really about the pursuit of happiness and fruitful participating lives. And that's surely an objective we all have. Another statistic that I would like to mention is that there are estimated to be approximately 1 million Chinese Australians in the Australian population. 1 million out of about 23 million, which means that proportionally there are many Chinese Australians in Australian society. It is also one of the oldest migration communities into Australia, going back really to the time of European settlement in this country and even in the northwest of Australia prior to European settlement. It's one of the most fast-growing migrant populations in this country. Like the broader Australian population, it is estimated that about 1 in 5 or 20% of Chinese Australians also in a 12-month period may experience mental health issues. Another statistic I wish to mention is that for Lifeline, we understand that the Australian population is a culturally diverse population, with 1 in 4 Australians born out of Australia, and 1 in 2 Australians having a parent born out of Australia. So this is the reality of Australia in 2018. And Lifeline is a charity that seeks to serve all Australians. So we are interested in understanding all Australians, including the cultural diversity of many people, especially today acknowledged in Chinese Australia. Researchers told us that 1 in 10 of the contacts to our telephone crisis line state that they are coming from a background where English was not their first language. So that is encouraging to know that 1 in 10 of the users of our crisis line are from non-English speaking backgrounds, but also may lay down a challenge that we would like to see more diversity in our users. So the study and the findings I wish to present have real relevance to Lifeline Australia. These are the project aims: to establish the needs of Chinese Australians for crisis support, to examine the cultural outlook on mental health and well-being concepts, including concepts and understandings around suicidality, to assess the community's preferences for services and activities, to identify the communication, marketing and community engagement that is required to present mental health and wellbeing and suicide prevention services to Chinese Australians, and to nominate the factors that are critical to the effectiveness and success of those services. In other words, it is a study that has sought to engage with and better understand the needs and preferences of Chinese Australians. We did this in a number of different ways. We did some basic literature review, as you do in any study, to see what knowledge already existed and what published work academically exists on the mental health and wellbeing of Chinese Australians. We also undertook consultations with services and community leaders and asked them for their views and experiences. We also undertook an online survey, directly promoted, including through the assistance of some of you here today, thankfully, to reach out to people from all walks of life and ask them directly to provide us with responses to the survey. And we were very successful, getting several thousand responses. We also looked at interviews and focus groups to better understand in depth or qualitatively what the feedback and insights we were hearing meant. So it is what you call, in research terms, a mixed method study. What did we find? Well, firstly, from the desktop research analysis of existing knowledge and our looking at statistics, we found, as I mentioned earlier, that there are high numbers of Chinese Australians, including in New South Wales more than 500,000, most of whom live in this city of Sydney. We discovered that there are several examples internationally of language-specific telephone helplines offered. And through the network of Lifeline organisations, which extends to approximately 20 countries outside of Australia, active Lifeline services are operating in Shanghai as an English-based service, but in Hong Kong and Taiwan as language-specific services. We also were able to form a relationship and interact with the operators of the Beijing telephone crisis line in mainland China. We were also able to consult with our Lifeline colleagues in Lifeline Aotearoa in New Zealand that for many years operated a language-specific Chinese telephone helpline that unfortunately is not currently operating but operated for almost 20 years. We were also able to look at the map of services provided for Chinese Australians in the Sydney area using statistics collected. And this map shows the spread of existing services. The dark green area shows where there are more than 7 language-specific, culturally specific services relating to mental health support in those local government areas across Sydney. And it's perhaps not surprising that the higher concentrations of services are in the north and northwestern areas of Sydney, where there are particular populations of Chinese Australian communities. However, you can see that the spread of services is not uniform across Greater Sydney, and you may be aware yourself of some parts of Greater Sydney where there are prominent populations of Chinese Australians, such as the St George and Sutherland local government areas that have virtually no language or culturally specific services identified. Let me also say that it is apparent to us that even 7 or more services is not a large number of services. So there is not a lot of services relating to language and cultural specific provision around mental health support. From the survey results, we learnt some more things. I should note that 80% of the respondents to the survey were from women. Now, that's not unusual to Chinese Australian populations. When we have surveyed Anglo-Australian populations, we often get more responses from women. But it also gave us an insight that in fact there appears to be a prominence of Chinese Australian women involved in trying to deal with the issues around mental health and well-being. And therefore we took it as immediate learning that we need to engage with the women who are perhaps doing things currently, and we also need to engage with Chinese Australian men who may not be engaging around some of these issues. There is a significant proportion of Chinese Australians who have recently experienced a period of stress or know someone else who has. More than a third of respondents answered affirmatively to those questions. And almost a third, 27%, over a quarter, stated that they knew of suicide deaths in the Chinese Australian community. Common triggers for stress and anxiety included issues such as financial and family-related problems. And in this sense, the Chinese Australian community is not greatly different from the wider Australian community. The most frequently presenting issues of crisis or distress for people coming to Lifeline services relate to family and personal relationships, issues around personal identity and belongingness or connection in the community, health and well-being, and closely after that, finances, employment, and life struggles. So Chinese Australians experience in that sense similar issues of distress and concern in their lives. For those that have experienced a period of stress, nearly 2/3 stated that they had not sought help from someone else during that time. And again, Chinese Australians are not greatly different from the wider population, where the ABS statistics on this show that 2/3 of Australians broadly that experience a mental health issue do not access professional services to address that issue. Considering the prevalent mental health issues in Australia are anxiety and depression, both of which have many evidence-based effective treatments for recovery and support, the reality is that many people who could get better and have more fruitful participating lives do not access the services and supports that could enable them to achieve that. And that is a human suffering issue, not just a health and social issue. We found also from the responses to the survey that social and community barriers were often common to people expressing their needs or challenges of distress and to seeking help. And again, the Chinese Australian communities are not greatly different from the broader community of Australia. That is, help seeking in times of trouble does not occur automatically. In particular, in relation to suicidal behaviour, recent research has suggested amongst people who have attempted to end their life, as many as half have not consulted anyone for help or support prior to that catastrophic experience. We asked specifically what Chinese Australians experience stress about, and I thought this table might show more graphically than my narrative the proportions of people worried about families and raising children, those who are concerned about pressures from work, and the struggle with financial pressures. So our survey results have given us a good indication about what might be some of the issues that we could reach out to people and offer support on and encourage people to talk with others about. The qualitative research through interviews and focus group findings reinforced the survey results. We found that mental health issues and issues that are causing distress are often not openly discussed and may be attached to a stigma a reticence to talk about one's own or one's family's mental health and well-being for fear of negative attitudes. Again, the Chinese Australian community is not greatly different from others in Australian society. Men overall in Australia are noted for their reticence in seeking help, and some groups of men, particularly male farmers, have particular issues around stoicism and reluctance to reveal any sense of struggle for fear that people might negatively think that they are weak or unable to resolve problems. This notion of self-autonomy or self-determination, even though life is difficult, is a common trait across our broader society. But we understood from the focus groups that there were nuances and particular issues for Chinese Australians that also fueled the reluctance to disclose issues and seek help, giving us the impression that for us to design services and community supports, we needed to be sensitive to the cultural context in which those life struggles may occur and the barriers that people may perceive in disclosing their need for support. The desire for privacy came forward as a critical factor, and for Lifeline, which offers in its mainstream national crisis support services the promise of confidentiality, services that people can use without you having to provide health records or even your name, we understand the importance of a safe place for people to connect with someone else during a time of difficulty and confide with them. Other barriers that we identified in the study were simply around language, and we realised the importance of language, or rather the absence of language-specific services, as a potential barrier for Chinese Australians to seek help. We appreciate that English provision of service, even with access to telephone information interpreters and other interpreters, may not be sufficient for a person who wishes to talk in their primary or birth language about personal matters. And the quote there perhaps sums it up. There are problems that everybody faces, whether you're part of the Chinese community or not. But it is coloured by the fact that people here are either very far from their families or they have families that come and go. And there's a bit of family-related trauma that's not obvious to the Chinese community. So we do have, through this study, a much clearer understanding of cultural and community nuances and factors that we need to address in service provision. So where has the study taken us? What are our conclusions? There is a high correlation level across the outcomes of the project activities and the identification of need, a firm basis for establishment of Chinese language specific Lifeline services. Next, in examining the survey results and other aspects, it is apparent that there is currently a limited number of services available, which creates a challenge not only for people in the community but also for services such as Lifeline in terms of who we might link into with other services for longer term treatments and recoveries. Next, it is important to provide support services and outreach in languages in a culturally appropriate way. Next, that services need to offer privacy and confidentiality. Next, that communication about mental health needs to be sensitive to barriers and attitudes in the community. Services that provide a first point of contact for help seeking also will be beneficial as part of the overall service response. Also, that there is an underlying demand for services in the population that is not being met, and that more outreach into the Australian Chinese community is warranted. Also, we noted that there is some benefit in looking at how organisations such as Lifeline and other services can help build the understanding and capacity of the Chinese Australian community itself in providing meaningful supports through its own social and community networks. So perhaps through education and training programs, perhaps through supporting community outreach, perhaps through working specifically with those women who are currently often performing the support roles to see how their roles can be enhanced and they can receive more support. Also, as a byproduct of the study, we have now strengthened the relationship between those of us in Australia involved in helplines provision and those in China involved in helplines activities. And through the exchange of research and practice knowledge, believe that that will facilitate more understanding between both the two countries, but also to the benefit of the Chinese Australian community. The next steps. Well, the first one is what we're doing here today and asking for those of you working in the media to assist us in raising awareness about the findings of this study and the importance of addressing the need of Chinese Australians around their mental health and well-being. We want Chinese Australians to have fulfilling, productive and participating lives, as we wish for every person in broader Australian society. Secondly, Lifeline is looking to work with Bridging Hope and others to deliver community education into the Chinese Australian communities in an appropriate and effective way, and to work with community leaders and others in doing so. Thirdly, to progress from the findings in our feasibility study to look in greater detail around scoping what would be required to establish language-specific telephone or online-based support services for Chinese Australians, and to work through how, in an operational and resource sense, that can be achieved. That may involve working with others as well as ourselves to work out how to do that. So, in concluding, I would like to thank all of you again for the interest you've taken in this study. To acknowledge again the commitment and the innovation shown by the Bridging Hope Charity Foundation, and particularly its founder, Ms. Tina Tian, towards looking at how mental health and arts can foster a happier, more productive community and address human need so that people can seek and find the support they need at the times they're struggling in their lives. I would also like to acknowledge all of those people from Chinese Australia communities who participated in our study. Several thousand people gave of their time to share with us their insights and their knowledge, and I cannot say how much we appreciate that. Thank you also for coming to the launch activity today, and on that note I would like to invite the next speaker, Ms. Mary Lee, to speak with you from the perspective as a consumer advocate in the health system. Thank you, Mary.
And thank you, Mr. Stephen Fitzpatrick from the Bridging Hope Foundation, Charity Foundation, and thank you for the Lifeline Research Foundation. My name is Mary Yan, and I'm the current multicultural health worker. We're working within the multicultural health team. We call ourselves population health now, within the community health team of Western Sydney local health district. I myself worked in the local Sydney health district for many years, and then transferred to Western Sydney local health district. So I really I'm the person really look after the Chinese population from Hills District to Parramatta, Auburn, Maryland, Poroid. Used to be Blacktown, but now Blacktown is in the other area. So, but we work with the Blacktown and Mount team. So it's very large Great Western area that we look after. And helpline that I've been working with for many years in my past working career. And recent years, since I came to Western Sydney Local Health District, I had a lot of contact also with helpline as well. And coincidentally, last year when I was attending a meeting, the Western Sydney Mental Health Chinese Summer Committee meeting, that I met Melody and Anki. As soon as we introduced ourselves, and these two passionate ladies grabbed me. They knew that I've got the people in my hands in Great Western Sydney. So we started contact to each other, and I think it was middle of last year, Anki and Melody went to the group that I support. I support very large groups who can all speak migrant background, to speak much English. The Cantonese group speak little English, but the Mandarin group, especially in the aging population, they don't speak much English. So we had an interpreter from Western Sydney Local Health District. They did a wonderful information session to promote this project. So we had 120 people on the day turned up for the event. It was very successful. I'm sure you did a great evaluation. After the information session, and I advocated the research survey. So I think we collected how many, about 60-something surveys through the people on the day, and also I forward on 40-something surveys afterwards. So there are a lot of findings. As Alan mentioned, nearly 5% of the Chinese population are taking the whole part of our population percentage. And also, as one of the fast growth population of our very typical multicultural country in Australia, the Chinese population is one that we can't ignore. And I gave you a very typical example. I lived in the hills, in Castle Hill, for 21 years. 21 years ago, and my street, I was the second Chinese family. The other family was Malaysian Chinese. Now, this day, every single house sold are Chinese family. So my street nearly Chinatown now. You walk on the street, you talk to everyone. So that's how it is. And as you all know, Chinese people following the schools. So Hills District have some very famous schools. And James Roos, Oakland Hills High Schools. Matthew Pierce Public School is one of the one that has 67% of population. The whole school has 1,400 students. 67% of the population are Asian. So outside my work, this is my work part that I engage with all the areas, not only mental health, but age population, child family, others as well. I work with a lot of major large organizations in Sydney. Outside my work, my other commitment, I'm the current president of Australian Chinese Language School Association. As you can imagine, that we have about more than 300 Chinese schools. And I'm also the current principal of the Hills Chinese School. We're located on 8 public schools in the Hills area. That I know better than anyone how fast the population is growing in the Hills. Because when we established our Chinese school in Matthew Pierce Public School, the school population was 486. Today, 1,400 students in that school. And we've been running our Chinese school in the school for the last 16 years. And we expanded last year into 8 schools. So I'm dealing with, at my work, aged population, new migrants, new settled residents in the Hills and in Parramatta area. With the Chinese school, I'm dealing with parents, students. So across all generations, and we're talking about 4 generations of Chinese population. Working as a frontline person, and I know exactly what is the day-to-day life and stress and the experience of the Chinese people. So as Alan mentioned earlier on, all the things from the research finding are the very important issues in their life, and also the barriers. Of course, language, social isolation, we're working towards all those issues. And a lot of service providers, large organizations, try to come into the hills area now, because hills used to be called the well-off area, and not many service providers has office there. Recently, Parramatta CRMC has launched a new office in the hills, and the largest Chinese service organization, CAS, has also launched their outreach office in the service in the hills district, which I assisted for the process. So my work engages all different organizations and the local of the Chinese population, and my volunteer work that I directly involved day to day for the Chinese population as well. As Mr. Allen mentioned earlier on, it is a very important area and we haven't addressed enough in the past. So I really deeply appreciate the wonderful work that Bringing Hope Charity Foundation and the Lifeline Research Foundation is doing. And I really thank you for the wonderful work that Anki, Melody, and your team are doing. Because what is our hope? Not only just the raising awareness, and I hope the piece of work that you guys have produced would really influences the decision makers, the policy makers, decision makers, and also the service providers. Awareness of understanding the needs of the Chinese community. People, when a lot of people, especially when you mention about privacy, confidentiality issue, you look at the Chinese people, if they have a child who are disabled at home, in China, in olden time, they will lock them at home because they feel embarrassed of having the kids like that. That's old traditional. Of course, today's day is changing. But again, because of the confidentiality and the face, face is the most important people in the Chinese tradition. They don't talk about it. If they suffer from stress or suffer from mental health issue, no one likes to talk about it. They wouldn't open up to anyone. That is very sad. And this is the area really requires more support and more help. So I hope the piece of work we do and also the great findings that you guys have contributed into would really make a great contribution to the decision maker, to the policy maker, to the whole community, and especially the service providers, and also as well as the Chinese community themselves, for people to understand in each family, if something's not going right, if something goes wrong, and if someone is not acting as normal, there's something wrong, and they need help. So for them to have the guts, to have the encouragement, the courage to talk to someone, I think this is so important. So I'm ready to work with all of you, and I'm ready to support whatever we can within my work area, and also whatever role that I'm playing in outside work or within my work, to continue for your wonderful work. And I congratulate all of you for the wonderful work you do. And thank you on behalf of all the staff and all the Chinese people for the wonderful work you do as well. And I wish you to continue working on it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Mary. And thank you to all you guys for coming along today. I think it's very clear that we're sort of a passionate group of people from the foundation through the Lifeline and the community groups. But you're here so you can help get that message out. It's very important, and we're very happy to have you here. And thank you very much for coming. I believe we've got a light lunch for everybody as well. But I think first of all, Alan and Mary and Anka are here to answer any questions that you have or any points that you need clarification on. Alan, did you want to come back up the front, or how did you want to do this, Anka?
Does anyone have any questions?
Any questions just relating to the study or? Sure.
Study is very, very interesting. I wonder if we, on top of the presentation material, I wonder if the study paper is available for us to access.
Yes, it is. It's available on both the Bridging Hope Charity Foundation website and also the Lifeline Australia website.